Listen, if discipline keeps collapsing in your life, the problem isn't effort and it's not motivation. It's formation. You're not failing because you're weak. You're failing because you're carrying the wrong weight and likely carrying it from the wrong place. Men are designed to carry pressure. Pressure is not the enemy, but misplaced weight is. This video isn't about trying harder. It's about understanding why discipline breaks down even when you care. So let's get to work. Okay, if some of this sounds familiar today, that's intentional. Because we've already talked about the what. We've named the problem and we've exposed the pattern. But today we're going to slow down and deal with the why. Why these issues persist. Why disciplines collapse and why formation has to come first. And then on the next Tactical Tuesday, we'll get very practical and we'll deal with the how. Specific strategies and tactics to start walking through winning in this area. Moving forward, this is the model. Transformation Thursdays will focus on spiritual formation, what's actually shaping men and why they're distracted or defeated. And then on Tactical Tuesdays, we'll focus on execution, clear strategies and tools to help you apply what we're building in. And I'm also adding something new to the channel, Coaching Convos with Dr. O. This is where I'm going to talk through real coaching situations that have happened with clients and specific strategies that we've used to help people win in real life. Most of what I teach here is designed for men, not because it's exclusive, but because that's my focus. Men who are searching for more, men who care but feel stuck, or men that are naturally growth-minded and high performers and looking for that extra edge. So let me lay out a few of the principles that we're going to go over today. Discipline failure is not new behavior. This is something that's gone on for generations. It's an old formation producing predictable outcomes. And this video isn't a rah-rah session. It's not about motivation. This video is about how the inner man is shaped over time. You see, as men, we don't rise to the level of our intention. We fall to the level of our formation, of our identity. All right, so let's get started by talking about what we're actually talking about. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about what we're actually discussing today. We're talking about spiritual formation. And spiritual formation is happening in every man's life. Whether you're intentional about it or not doesn't matter. It's happening. No one is unformed. The only question is who or what is forming you. Spiritual formation is what is shaping you over time. It's how your beliefs become your instincts. It's how your reactions become defaults. And it's how identity moves from an idea to something embodied. It's how you begin to live from your identity. And here's a huge key. Spiritual formation builds your identity. And identity, once formed, reinforces formation. What you believe shapes how you live. And how you live confirms what you believe. That's why formation matters so much. Formation is not about what you know. Formation is about your defaults under pressure. Like, how do you respond when the pressure comes? What is your go-to method of response? Whatever your default under pressure is, reveals the identity that you've been formed into. Spiritual formation answers the question, who am I becoming in the eyes of God? Dallas Willard said it this way, spiritual formation is the process by which the human spirit or will is given a definite form or character. Listen, we're not talking about gathering more information. We're not talking about necessarily doing more activities for the sake of activity. It's not just external obedience alone. It's not even just discipline alone. It's about internal alignment that produces desire for obedience and discipline. Because as men, We don't fail at discipline because we hate structure. Most of us actually probably like structure a lot. We fail because discipline is serving the wrong formation. So let me talk to you about my personal story a little bit. And I know I've done this in the past, and I probably will continue to do that because it's very relevant to who I am and why I do what I do. I was the lead pastor of a church. I became the lead pastor of a church at 30 years old. And I was carrying a tremendous amount of responsibility. The retiring pastor had been there for over 30 years, was well up in his 70s, getting ready to turn 80. And that was a huge role to step into. He cast a large shadow, and it was big shoes to fill. And I was just a kid, really, 30 years old. And I was carrying a ton of real responsibility, leading a congregation as their shepherd, being responsible for their spiritual growth and development. And I've always had leadership abilities. I've always had leadership capabilities, and I have always worked to hone those. And the problem for me was not the calling. It wasn't the position itself. It was how I responded to it. Everything that I did from a place of trying to earn God's love and trying to earn people's approval, proving to them that even though I was young, I was worthy. I literally had people tell me I can't go to a church where the pastor is younger than me. Well, like eventually you're going to age out, but whatever. And so I found myself where I was constantly performing. How do I outdo the message from last week? What illustration can I use? What prop can I have? What can I say that will hit harder? You see, I was working for love, not from love. I was literally working for the love of the people and for the love of God. Carrying weight from love builds strength. Carrying weight from love builds strength. But carrying weight from obligation or trying to earn something creates an undue pressure that leads to brokenness. And that's exactly what it did in me. And that's why Scripture doesn't start with behavior, it starts with formation. I use this passage a lot because this is one of the foundational passages for spiritual formation. Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may test and approve what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Transformation is not behavior modification. It's not just changing your behavior and becoming compliant to a set of rules. Spiritual transformation, spiritual formation is actually an internal process. It is the renewing of your mind. And execution, the things that we do, that's downstream from formation, if we're doing it right. Execution, the things that we do, the tasks that we accomplish, the behavior that we elicit, that is downstream from a properly placed spiritual formation. What I'm saying is you don't obey your way into transformation. You are transformed into a man who obeys. Can you change your behaviors and appear transformed? You can for a little while. But in the long term, that doesn't work out. All right, so let's use a sports analogy. That works mostly for men. You imagine whoever you want. I'm going to use Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, the NBA player, not the NFL player. There is a young NFL player right now named Kobe Bryant. It freaked me out the first time I heard it. But let's use Kobe Bryant, the NBA star. Now, think what you want of Kobe. From a personal standpoint, I didn't care for Kobe all that much. He didn't seem to have a lot of the characteristics and traits that I was looking for in an individual. But it would be hard to argue that Kobe was not one of the greatest guys who ever played the game. And I heard this story from a guy that was his trainer about a reporter that wanted to come to one of Kobe's workouts. So the reporter says, I'm going to get there super early. He's not going to have to wait on me. I'm going to show that I'm excited and that I'm ready. And he gets to the appointment for the interview to be able to come into the practice about a half hour early. He expects to be pulling up to a dark gym, but what he pulls up to is doors open, lights on, and the sound of a basketball being dribbled and shoes squeaking on a hardwood floor from inside the gym. He's a half hour early. At that point, Kobe had already been working in his first workout for about 45 minutes. One of the young NBA players, young at the time, tells the story of the dream team when the NBA guys went to the first Olympics, I believe it was, and Kobe Bryant was a part of that team. And he said, I'm going to be the first guy to breakfast. I'm going to be the first guy to breakfast. I'm going to prove that even though I'm young, I'm hungry, I'm going to be the first guy to breakfast. And he walks into the room where the team is going to have breakfast. And there's Kobe Bryant sitting there with ice already on his knees, dripping with sweat, having already worked out for the day. Once. And he would work out multiple times a day. What do you think created that mindset in Kobe? What do you think created that mindset? Do you think that came from a heart and passion to be one of the greatest players to ever play the game? I'm sure it did to a degree. But it also came from being one of the greatest players in the game and knowing what was required to be there. You see, that kind of formation, it's a dual-edged sword. You pursue it, you pursue greatness, you pursue discipline because you know you want to be something. And because you know you are something, the discipline, the practice, the workouts, all of those things become a natural part of who you are. Formation precedes execution, always. Your true actions, your real you, always comes from who you are inside, always. So I'm going to talk about some things that we've already talked about, but we're going to go a little bit deeper today. We touched on some of these things in Tactical Tuesday, but I'm going to go deeper. So in 1951, Carl Rogers developed what he calls self-concept theory. And it talks about behavior aligning with self-perception. You will act like who you believe that you are. Men do what makes sense to who they really believe that they are. And here's how we get off. Repeated negative self-talk. Repeated failure without repair. Repeated giving into pressure or peer pressure. Repeated compromise coupled with excuses. You start out believing you're one thing, but you talk yourself out of it. You fail and you don't correct the mistakes. You give in to pressure, to compromise, and you never fix it. And so you compromise over and over and over again. And rather than making adjustments, you make excuses. What Rogers was identifying in the 50s is what Proverbs 23:7 says, for as a man thinks within himself, so is he. As a man thinks within himself, so is he. You will act out who you believe that you are. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you into something a little different. So every time you make a negative choice, you're becoming a little bit worse of a person. And every time you make a positive choice, you become a little bit better of a person. So what if you started with something pretty simple? What if you changed the way that you talk to yourself? If the most frequent things that you say to yourself are not negative, as a man, you're in the minority. You're so stupid. How could you do that? You could never accomplish that. You're not smart enough. You're not young enough. You're not rich enough. You're not wise enough. You're not whatever enough. What if you changed that? You know, no man collapses all of a sudden. He collapses only after his identity quietly shifts. And his identity usually shifts based upon what he says to himself, what he hears from himself, and what he believes about himself. And I'll tell you this, if you're one of those negative self-talkers, welcome to the club. It's probably the vast majority of men. But what if you change that? What if you began to allow your ears to hear your voice so that your heart could receive truth spoken about you by you? What if you began to speak to yourself positively? What if you change that you don't know enough to, man, I may not have the knowledge, but I'm going to figure it out. Man, I may not have the resources to accomplish what I feel like I'm being called to, but if it's God's will, it's God's bill. I know that's cheesy, but it's true. If it's God's will, it's God's bill. And so I'm going to start looking for ways that I can contribute to what I believe God is calling me to. If you don't feel like you're enough, what if you just started telling yourself, I may not be enough, but God uses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and He's going to do something remarkable in me. This is why I'm working on some affirmations that I'll share with you soon. I will have a war-ready 7-day challenge coming up shortly that I can email to you. And what it's going to include is it's going to be a personal affirmation, a verse to support that affirmation, and a quick activity for you to do. We're going to do it for 7 days to kind of reboot our thinking, kind of reboot our mentality. So I talked on Tuesday about Leon Fetzinger and his cognitive dissonance theory. Identity conflicts create tension. Quitting, when you're talking about doing something positive that is not in line with who you believe that you are, quitting resolves that tension. And we most of the time choose relief from the tension over the growth that will come from the thing that we're doing. So let's use 2 examples. For those of you who have ever smoked, I will speak for myself. My very first cigarette was disgusting. I hated it. I coughed. I choked. I almost threw up. My very first dip, I did throw up. But because I wanted to be the kind of person who got to hang out with the smokers and the dippers, I convinced myself that I could do it. And that led to years of addiction. At one point, smoking over 2 packs a day, even though that very first one was gross. And I knew it wasn't something that I really wanted to do. I forced myself to do it because I wanted the result that I thought it would give me. What it ended up giving me was an addiction that cost me thousands of dollars over the years, probably tens of thousands of dollars over the years, and a heartache of a time trying to kick that addiction. It happens in the negative. It also happens for positive things. Right now, it's January 8th, and right now people all over the country are going to the gym for the first few times of the year, for the first few times in years, some of them. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to convince themselves that this is part of who they are. But because it hasn't already been a part of who they are, it's creating this natural tension in them. It feels uncomfortable. And you begin to lie to yourself. You begin to lie to yourself and say, everybody's looking at me. I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody's watching. I'm the fat guy at the gym. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to. And you start talking yourself out of it. And because that tension conflicts with who you believe that you are, the moment that you say, I'm not going anymore, it relieves that tension. You've chosen relief over the growth that will come from embracing the tension and going to the gym. And choosing that relief is what most people will do. Most people will choose relief from the tension and give up. And I say this all the time, and I'm going to say it again. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always be who you've always been. And so many of us want to be so much more, and so many of us are called to be so much more. But we give in to the idea that that's not who I am, and so I can't continue to act in that way because it's uncomfortable. Like, you know you're called to this, but you give in to the pressure to quit. That's what James 1:8 is referring to. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Doulos is the word for double-minded. Of two minds, literally of two minds. One part of my brain is saying, I'm going to be healthy, and the other part of my brain is saying, I'm not going to do the work. One part of my brain is saying, I'm going to be healthy, and one part of my brain is saying, I want Girl Scout Thin Mints. And it's in that tension where most of us give up and we stop going to the gym and we start eating the Thin Mints and we continue to live the life that we say we despise, but our actions prove otherwise. Augustine said this. He said, the punishment of every disordered mind is its own disorder. The punishment for your disordered mind is the disorder itself. And you see, we don't quit because discipline is hard. We quit because doing something hard conflicts with who we believe that we are, and that's exhausting. But if you're ever going to overcome that, you've got to just push through it. Roy Baumeister and Kathleen Voss talked about the effective motivation and self-regulation failure. Emotion initiates an action. You see yourself in the mirror. Oh, what have I become? You're walking up a flight of stairs and you can't make one flight of stairs with being out of breath. And it elicits this emotion in you that instigates change. But emotion will not sustain change. There has to be regulation. Emotion is a spark. It's an instigator, but it's not a structure. So the emotions cycle through this process of emotion. I'll start. And then as the emotions drop, we disengage from the activity. And then guilt kicks in, so we recommit and we repeat it over and over and over again, usually with longer spans of disengagement in between. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 7:24 through 27. Therefore, if anyone who hears these words of mine and does them may be compared to a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them may be compared to the foolish man who builds his house on the sand. Emotion wants quick results. We'll build our houses on sand and they'll fall down at the first sign of discomfort. But identity builds its house on the rock, and the winds come and the rains come and the house stands. Dallas Willard said that grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning. What he was saying when he said this is that most men confuse grace with passivity. They hear grace and they assume no discipline's required, God's gracious. No resistance is needed because God's gracious. I don't have to train myself or coax myself into doing things that are hard because God's gracious. Yes, God is gracious. But that is not what biblical grace looks like. That's actually what spiritual negligence looks like. So the real distinction is, how do I determine between when I'm walking in grace versus when I'm trying to earn God's love? Well, trying to earn God's love says, I'm going to do this so that God will love me and God will accept me. I'm going to do this so that I can get on God's good side. But grace says, I'm accepted. I'm loved. So I'm going to live this way. Grace removes the performance-based identity, but not the responsibility. Effort is still required. Grace does not eliminate effort. Grace redefines effort. Effort under an earning mindset is fear-driven, image-protecting, outcome-obsessed. Effort under grace is rooted in your identity. It's driven from a place of freedom, and it's focused on forming the best version of yourself. Grace gives you the permission to train without proving. And grace gives you the permission to fall down without failing. Here's the key. Spiritual formation requires effort because Habits have to be built. Your default modes have to be retrained. And your identity, the one that God gave you, has to be embodied. It has to be lived out. But the effort in those things isn't aimed at trying to earn God's approval. It comes from a place of deep alignment, where in your heart, in your soul, in the depth of your being, you are in line with who God says that you are. So you don't practice the disciplines to become a son. You become a son, and that compels you to institute the disciplines. Grace doesn't remove the work. It removes the unbearable weight of earning while you do the work. Again, my personal story in full-time ministry, something that I had longed for my entire life. It was my calling. I was doing a good work, but I had the wrong internal formation. I didn't see myself as Floyd, the beloved Son of God. I saw myself as Pastor Floyd, working to earn his approval and the approval of others. You can be doing the right thing from the wrong place and end up with an unhealthy identity. And the results can hide the formation failure for a while. I was, by all accounts, a successful pastor. The church was happy. We were growing slowly, but small town church. We were growing slowly. There were great ministries happening. Wonderful church, wonderful body. It wasn't until after I resigned and no longer held the position that I realized that I was working from the wrong place, and I literally lost myself for 7 years. I wasn't lacking effort. I was working hard, but I was working from the wrong place. I was carrying the wrong weight from the wrong place. Formation is neurological. It's not abstract. Neuroplasticity, and I know we've talked about this. Norman Doidge, in 2007, talked about how neuroplasticity allows repetition to rewire the brain. And so when we're walking around aimless, that's a learned trait. We've wired our brain to do that. And so when you really create and hardwire a discipline into your mindset, it takes a lot of effort to give up on that discipline. Yesterday, for example, here's a good example. Yesterday, my habit is, for a very long time, I get up in the morning, I go in the bathroom, I use the facilities, I wash my face, I brush my teeth, I come back, I make the bed if my bride's not still in it, and she's usually not because she gets up a lot earlier than I do. And then I go to the coffee pot and I get a cup of coffee and I go to my recliner, or I come to my desk, or I grab a cigar and go outside with my Bible and my Remarkable, which is essentially just a digital notebook. And I read the Word and I write notes of what I'm learning and I write out a prayer, and that's it. That's how I start my day. Almost every day. And I say almost because yesterday I've been battling this head cold, and yesterday I slept really well for the first time in a long time, and I woke up late and I had something on the calendar that I had to come straight to my desk for, and all throughout the day I just felt off. And I went on date night with my bride last night. We just went to get coffee and spend some time together. And as we were coming home, I was like, man, I just feel off. I'm feeling better, but I just feel off. And I realized, oh, I didn't get time in the Word today. And the habit of doing that so consistently is wired into my brain. So when I missed it, even though I couldn't identify what it was, probably because of all of the cold medicine, I couldn't identify what it was. I knew something was missing. And so when we got home from date night, it was just a coffee date. So she went into the kitchen and started cooking a quick dinner. And I went to my chair and got my Bible and my Remarkable, and I was great throughout the day. It takes effort to break the habits, whether good or bad. And that was a habit yesterday that at that point, once I recognized what it was, Once I recognized what the dissonance was that I was feeling, it would have taken effort to push that down, to not do it. It was honestly easier just to go get my Bible and spend some time with the Lord. This is what Proverbs 4:23 is saying. Guard your heart with all diligence. Protect your heart. We have to remember that in the Old Testament, a lot of the times where they're saying heart, it's your place of thinking. It's not this organ that pumps blood in your chest. It's the place where your thoughts come from. So guard your heart, guard your thinking with all diligence. From your thoughts flow springs of life. And this is why renewing your mind is such a powerful and remarkable tool that is necessary. Renewing your mind isn't metaphorical. This work that was done by Norman Doge in 2007, the Bible teaches this. Renewing your mind. Create new pathways. It's not metaphorical, it's literally neurological. You are literally instigating neuroplasticity to rewire your brain when you force yourself to do things that are uncomfortable and live in the tension of something you're doing not lining up with your identity. But eventually, you will renew your mind, you will rewire your brain, the neuroplasticity will kick in, and you will become what you have been working to become. Again, Albert Bandura, 1977. The self-efficacy theory. Confidence is built through mastery. Repeated self-betrayal trains low self-trust. So in other words, the more often that you break your promises to yourself, the easier it becomes to break the promises and the less you believe in you. So a new discipline can feel unsafe. Psalms 15:4 says, he swears to his own hurt and does not change. And this is what so many men do. We don't have self-efficacy. We don't believe that we have the ability to be effective in ourselves. So we make an allegiance to our pain. We swear to our hurts. We make an allegiance to our pain. And we say it's just easier to live here. And so we don't change. Integrity itself is not moral perfection. What integrity is it's self-trust built through kept promises. So now that we understand why identity collapses, why men carry weight from the wrong place, this coming Tuesday, Tactical Tuesday will focus on how discipline is rebuilt as formation is restored. We're going to get very strategic and very tactical, and we're going to give you some very practical, applicable steps that you can take to begin to rebuild spiritual formation and create new healthy habits in your life. The key is, stop trying harder. Stop carrying the wrong weight. Dive deeper into formation. Discipline isn't missing. Formation is missing. Be different.